Welcome to the NRS story, From Policy to Practice, brought to you by the NRS Support Project at the American Institutes for Research. If you're new to the world of NRS data or an experienced data user, you're in the right place. This podcast is where you hear about the practical application of data policy in adult education. Stick around.
Hello, I'm Delphinia Brown, Digital Learning Product Manager for the NRS Support Project. This episode of the NRS Story podcast highlights insights on challenges and successes in adult education during the shift from distance learning to virtual learning and service delivery over the last couple of years. Virtual learning and service delivery refers to teaching, learning, and the delivery of services remotely, or not in the same physical space as the person who is receiving the services. This is done through the use of technology with web-based tools and resources. Distance learning has long been an option for adult learners. The NRS distance ed policies actually go back decades, but recent innovations in educational technology have resulted in programs serving a record number of students virtually. The use of distance learning has been steadily increasing even before the COVID-19 pandemic. According to NRS, during the 2018-2019 program year, there was a 222% increase in adult learners participating in virtual learning programs, also marking a huge increase in demand for virtual services of all types. There's great variety in the range of virtual learning and service delivery models, reflecting the diversity in students, their needs, their communities, and program resources. There are many different ways to think about virtual learning and service delivery models based on factors like where students access the online program, teacher presence and availability, and the curriculum. There's also the matter of whether the program or class is fully online, self-paced, or teacher-directed. Research tells us that no matter the program model, students face similar challenges in addition to the traditional barriers to education for adults, such as limited digital literacy, lack of access to the internet and functional devices, difficulty accessing wraparound services and remote services such as recruitment, orientation, and assessment. But research also tells us that virtual learning can be as successful as classroom-based learning when certain conditions are present. In the summer of 2021, the NRS Support Project held a training for state adult education program directors and staff. We invited experts in virtual learning to share their perspectives on what makes for a successful virtual learning and service delivery program. Jordan Rickles is a principal researcher at the American Institutes for Research. He talked about several different studies on online learners that he's been involved in.
Really keep in mind the actual online learning model that you're interested in implementing. Kind of what are the different features of that model. Across these studies, we find some common findings and some different findings, especially when we expand it to kind of the broader work on online learning. And my belief here is that a lot of it has to do with what is the actual model that's being implemented, and how does that compare to what those students kind of would have experienced without that online course. In the studies that we've done, one of them was a study of 8th grade students in rural settings, rural schools, who did not, the numbers weren't there to have a standalone Algebra 1 course at their school. But for those students that were identified as kind of ready for an Algebra 1 course in 8th grade, we offered an online version of that. And in that setting, students seem to do pretty well with the online course. The other two studies, there's a study in Chicago public schools and then this study in Los Angeles, are both about students who had failed a course and trying to retake it in high school. And there, we see students do maybe as well, but definitely not better in the online course.
Jordan concludes that online programs are comparable to in-person learning in terms of student outcomes, In the case of an online program for rural students and other studies of students seeking credit recovery in Chicago and Los Angeles, the key to learner success was the availability of a teacher who received professional development on how to supplement the online course to meet the student's needs, or in other words, an instructor who could personalize learning and provide scaffolds and supports for learners challenged by self-directed learning. Daniel Cox's experience with virtual learning in a correction setting echoes what Jordan observed from his studies with online credit recovery programs and secondary education. Danielle also shared her lessons learned on the ground with adult education program administrators at the 2021 Virtual Learning and Service Delivery Training. In her role as the Director of Correctional Education at the Division of Workforce Development and Adult Learning for the Maryland Department of Labor, she oversaw the scaling up of a virtual occupational training and certification program. The Maryland Correctional Education Tablet Program grew from 8 online programs and 87 tablets before the 2020 COVID-19 quarantine to 25 online programs and 400 tablets across the state after. Participation rates are just one part of the story. Danielle credits a large part of the success of the program to teacher professional development.
I think sometimes we kind of push it. It's like a side burner sometimes, right? Whether it's virtual or in person, it needs to be meaningful, or even if it's delivered just in-house, right? But I would say look outside too, right? Sometimes they get sick of hearing from just you. They need like an outside voice too, coming in, and use surveys to find out what the teachers are interested in and what they're struggling with, right? Give them a list of topics and then maybe other category of things that maybe quarterly that you can have different PDs about. And we require teachers to fill out a PD tracking sheet that actually has a set number of hours that they have to complete per. We give them some PD internally, we do some outside, but then we also want them to look for their own things they're interested in too. We started that 2 years ago and it's been a great success.
The TABE scores for these participants also back up the success of the virtual occupational training program. Participants in the program attain their GED and skills at a faster rate, and 72% of these students, once released, were able to get and retain a job in certification areas like automotive maintenance and inspection, welding, office technology, and carpentry. At the height of the quarantine in 2020, the virtual certification program, consisting of teacher-recorded videos burned to DVD and played during lockdown, was supplemented by virtual live Google Meets lessons for special education students and weekly proxy work graded by teachers. Data showed clear differences between student groups. There were better outcomes for students who had access to the tablet videos and the teacher-recorded videos versus those who only had proxy work. Again, it was the combination of the core instruction with the addition of an instructor's presence, in this case teacher-recorded videos during lockdowns and closures, that made the difference, with the teacher-recorded videos offering a level of personalized feedback and support that led to improved student outcomes. As a result of the program's success during the quarantine lockdown, academic, rehabilitation, and wellness components were added to the tablet program, along with job attainment and career explorations. Danielle nicely sums up the key takeaways for programs interested in replicating her program's success.
I would say if there's 2 things, just making sure that we're doing the virtual with that in-person instruction and then investing in professional development. And then the state, how they can make it meaningful and support is making sure they're consulting with the adult ed providers, right? And it's not one of those from the top down, that they're making sure that they're talking to them about their needs, such as whether it's network and internet availability or different technology stuff, tablet software, materials, making sure they have what they need and the funding that they need.
The research and the programs just discussed show that while there may be challenges to virtual learning and service delivery, there are evidence-based ways to overcome those challenges and tons of best practices forged from the necessity to innovate distance learning that can be harnessed to improve virtual learning and service delivery. The urgency of the pandemic, which led to the huge increase in virtual learning, is behind us, but virtual learning and service delivery has been forever changed. Looking ahead, state and local adult education program staff will need to determine how to best meet their learners' needs, and policies will have to align with what we learn is needed to make virtual learning and service delivery work for learners. Research highlights several suggestions for just how to do this. 1. Begin with a reflective approach. Implement a well-planned instructional model and employ available resources. And, as is the NRS way, continuously monitor and evaluate meaningful data to make improvements that ensure the virtual learning and service delivery program's success. We appreciate you tuning in for this episode of the NRS Story about the shifts in virtual learning and service delivery and turning challenges into successes. You can review the companion brief to this podcast episode on the nrsweb.org and also learn more about virtual learning and service delivery and NRS distance learning policy. Research briefs about the online credit recovery study mentioned in this episode and other studies of online learning programs are available at AIR.org.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the NRS Story, From Policy to Practice. Remember that you can visit nrsweb.org for more information about the NRS and tips on how to make the most of your program's data.